Welcome to Southwest Desert, where adventure meets the arid beauty of the American Southwest. Join us as we explore the rugged landscapes, uncover hidden historical gems, and dive deep into the rich legends and culture of this iconic region. Subscribe now and hit the bell icon so you don't miss out on the latest desert adventures. Please leave a like or comment. This is very helpful. Let's journey together into the heart of the Southwest Desert. It's 1819, and the scorching Arizona sun beats down on an extraordinary scene unfolding at the Tucson Presidio. Chief Chilitapaj, leading 236 Apaches, approaches the Spanish fortress, not with weapons drawn but with hands extended in peace. Within weeks, the scene would repeat itself as 10 additional Apache chiefs and their bands arrived, seeking reconciliation with their former enemies. This remarkable moment wasn't just a diplomatic breakthrough, it was the culmination of decades of transformation in Spanish Arizona. How did a region once defined by brutal warfare between Spanish settlers and Apache raiders become a place where former enemies could break bread together? Today, we're diving deep into one of the most fascinating yet overlooked periods of American Southwest history, the final years of Spanish Arizona, a story of conflict, innovation, and an unlikely peace. To understand this transformation, we need to travel back to 1691, when a determined Jesuit missionary named Father Eusebio Kino first arrived in this unforgiving landscape. Kino's mission was clear: bring Christianity to the indigenous peoples of the region. But success proved elusive. While the Pima and Sobai Puri Native Americans showed some receptiveness to his message, most native peoples maintained their traditional ways, resistant to Spanish influence. This tension eventually erupted in the Pima Rebellion, a watershed moment that forced Spanish authorities to establish the Tubac Presidio in 1752. This military outpost would become the first in a network of fortifications designed to protect Spanish interests in the region. But protection was sorely needed. The situation was far more dire than many in Madrid realized. The Apache raids were relentless and strategically coordinated. Some Apaches dominated the San Pedro River corridor, while Chiricahua and Pinal Gila Apaches terrorized settlers throughout both the San Pedro and Santa Cruz valleys. By the 1770s, Spanish forces found themselves pushed into a defensive position, struggling to maintain even basic control of their northern frontier. Enter King Carlos III of Spain, whose 1772 regulations would reshape the entire region. These weren't minor adjustments. They represented a complete overhaul of Spain's frontier policy. Based on the comprehensive 1768 report by the Marquis de Rubi, the new regulations called for a strategic cordon of presidios along the frontier. But perhaps most significantly, they marked a dramatic shift in Spanish Indian policy, transferring control from the church to the military and establishing a controversial policy of Indian extermination. The implementation was swift and decisive. The Tubac garrison relocated to Tucson in 1776, establishing the new Presidio of San Agustin del Tucson. Two other garrisons briefly moved north but returned south by 1780, creating a more concentrated defensive line. But the story takes a fascinating turn with the arrival of an exceptional commander, Captain Pedro Allende y Saavedra. Allende y Saavedra wasn't your typical frontier officer. A Spanish nobleman with 22 years of military experience, he commanded 77 well-trained men by 1778. His campaigns would become legendary among both Spanish settlers and native peoples. His May 1778 expedition north demonstrated Spanish reach, while his November 1779 defense against 350 Apaches showed Spanish resilience. Between 1783 and 1784, he led multiple campaigns to the Gila River, and his expeditions toward the Solomonville area proved that Spanish forces could project power deep into Apache territory. The Spanish military of this era was a fascinating blend of old-world military tradition and frontier adaptation. Each soldier carried an impressive arsenal: a lance for charging, a short sword for close combat, 2 pistols for immediate defense, and a carbine for distance engagement. They wore distinctive 6-ply leather jackets called cueras, which could stop arrows but proved challenging in the Arizona heat. Their leather shields completed a defensive ensemble that was effective against masked enemies but less suited for the hit-and-run tactics favored by Apache warriors. Their tactics were equally distinctive. Spanish forces excelled at set-piece battles but struggled against the more mobile Apache raiders. In a practice that spoke to the brutality of frontier warfare, they would mount the heads of their enemies on lances as a warning, a grim reminder of the cost of resistance. But in 1786, everything changed with Bernardo de Galvez's revolutionary peace policy. Rather than continuing the cycle of violence, Galvez proposed something radical: establish peace settlements, establecimientos de paz, near the presidios. The policy was comprehensive and carefully considered. It included regular food and supply distributions, agricultural training, and even the controlled provision of liquor and old firearms to Apache groups who joined the settlements. This wasn't a small investment. The Spanish crown set aside 7,000 pesos for Sonoran settlements alone, with plans to feed up to 6,000 Indians. Multiple locations were selected for these settlements, creating a network of peaceful interaction between formerly hostile peoples. The results were remarkable. By 1793, the first Apache rancheria was established at Tucson. By the late 1790s, 18 Apache families had made Tucson their permanent home, with the Spanish government spending 1,600 pesos annually on their support. Another 40 Apache families settled at Bacuachi, creating a second successful peace settlement. This period of peace allowed for unprecedented development in the region. Religious architecture flourished, beginning with the construction of San Xavier del Bac in 1783. The Tumacacori mission followed in 1802, and the San Agustin del Tucson Convento was built between 1797 and 1810. These weren't just places of worship, they were symbols of the new stability. The economic transformation was equally impressive. Ranching expanded dramatically. By 1804, Tucson alone boasted 4,000 cattle, 2,600 sheep, and 1,200 horses. Major land grants reshaped the landscape. Rancho de Buenavista, La Canoa, San Jose de Sonoita, and the massive San Bernardino Grant, which supported an incredible 100,000 cattle. Agriculture diversified beyond traditional crops. While wheat, corn, beans, peas, and lentils remained staples, cotton production began to take root. Lime mining north of Tucson provided materials for construction, while mining operations near Arivaca and the Salero mine in the Santa Rita Mountains began extracting precious metals by 1821. This period of peace and prosperity wasn't achieved through military might alone. Captain José de Zúñiga's 1794 campaigns and the 1795 expedition, attempting to open a Santa Fe trade route, showed that Spanish authorities were thinking beyond mere security. They were building a sustainable future for the region. But as with all golden ages, this one too had to end. The transition to Mexican rule in 1821 marked the beginning of a slow decline. While Spanish captains remained in service and José Romero continued as Tucson's commander, the foundation of peace began to crack. The carefully maintained balance would hold until 1831, but various factors were already working against it. The reasons for the breakdown were complex. Political turmoil in Europe distracted Spanish authorities. Mexican independence brought new priorities and new challenges. The Mexican government lacked both the funds and the interest to maintain the expensive peace policy. The conversion of Apache peoples to a sedentary lifestyle proved incomplete, and Spanish military strength remained limited. Perhaps most importantly, the Apache people's fundamental resistance to abandoning their traditional way of life created an underlying tension that no amount of food or supplies could fully resolve. What makes this period so fascinating is not just the achievement of peace between former enemies, but what it tells us about the possibility of transformation. For 35 years, Spanish settlers and Apache peoples found a way to coexist, even if imperfectly. It's a chapter of history that reminds us how policy, persistence, and pragmatism can sometimes achieve what weapons and warfare cannot. As we look back at that sun-baked presidio where Chief Chilitapaj and his people sought peace in 1819, we're reminded that history is rarely as simple as we imagine. The story of Spanish Arizona's final years is one of complexity, adaptation, and the eternal human struggle between conflict and cooperation. It's a testament to the possibility of peace, even in the most unlikely circumstances, and a reminder that sometimes the boldest policy changes can yield the most remarkable results. I hope you enjoyed this Southwest story. Imagine being trapped on a sinking ship off the Mexican coast, your dreams of fortune seemingly drowning with it. Then picture yourself creating an entire city with nothing but sticks, stones, and string, just to avoid paying a ferry toll. Finally, envision building a 1,000-person boomtown where you're not just the mayor, you're the judge, the wedding officiant, and even have the power to declare war. This isn't the plot of a Western novel. This is the true story of Charles Poston, the man who would become known as the Father of Arizona. Welcome to Southwest Desert, where we uncover the most fascinating untold stories of the American Southwest. Today, we're diving into the incredible life of a man whose story reads like a blend of The Count of Monte Cristo and Tombstone, Charles Poston, a Kentucky orphan who would go on to shape the destiny of an entire territory. The year is 1825, and in Hardin County, Kentucky, the same region that produced Abraham Lincoln, a baby boy is born who would one day transform the southwestern frontier. Charles Poston's early life was marked by tragedy when he was orphaned at age 12. But like many great American stories, this one begins with a young man determined to make his mark on the world. He studied law, became a practicing attorney, and even crossed paths with the future President Lincoln. He married and had a daughter. But the call of adventure proved stronger than domestic life. When gold fever struck, he left his family with relatives and headed west. Unlike most fortune seekers, Poston didn't head straight for the gold fields. Instead, he secured a position as chief clerk in the San Francisco Custom House. It was here that fate dealt him an intriguing hand. He began working for the agent of General Agustino de Iturbide's family, who claimed a massive land grant in the newly acquired territory of Arizona. On December 31, 1853, just one day after the signing of the Gadsden Purchase, Poston embarked on what would become one of the most daring expeditions in southwestern history. Leading a 30-man party that included mining engineers and the brilliant Christian Herman Ehrenberg, he set sail from San Francisco. But the journey quickly turned into a nightmare. Their ship was blown off course and crashed against the rocks. The crew barely escaped with their lives before watching their vessel sink into the depths. But this was just the beginning of their troubles. They found themselves in a Mexico still bitter about its recent land losses to the United States, requiring delicate negotiations just to continue their journey. Despite these setbacks, the expedition proved fruitful. They located old Mexican silver mines, collected specimens of gold, silver, and copper, and discovered decaying missionary churches. Though they failed to locate the exact boundaries of the Iturbide Grant, these discoveries would prove valuable for future development. When the expedition finally reached the Colorado River, they encountered Louis J.F. Yeager, who operated a ferry service with prices so high they might as well have been highway robbery. Yeager justified his rates by citing the constant risk of Indian attacks. Rather than pay the exorbitant toll, Poston did something extraordinary. He founded a city. Using nothing but sticks, stones, and string, he laid out an entire town plan right there on the spot. Streets, a town square, pier areas, all marked out in the dust. Then, in a stroke of genius, he convinced Yeager himself to buy parcels of this instant city. The plan worked so well that they sold additional lots in California, turning what could have been a costly setback into a profitable venture for the entire expedition. But the story of Colorado City, as it was called, remains disputed to this day. Some claim it became modern-day Yuma, while others insist it was merely a temporary tent town further north. Whatever its ultimate fate, it demonstrated Poston's remarkable ability to turn obstacles into opportunities. In 1856, Poston embarked on his most ambitious venture yet, a 4-month journey covering 762 miles that would lead to the establishment of Tubac. The journey itself was an adventure worthy of a novel. It began in luxury, with French chefs preparing meals at the first military fort, but soon devolved into a grueling trek marked by Apache skirmishes and constant rain. The party stopped in Tucson for 2 weeks, coinciding with the St. Augustine Festival, before pressing on to their final destination. The choice of Tubac wasn't random. Located at the base of the Santa Rita Mountains, the site offered both defensive capabilities and proximity to mining operations, while maintaining a reasonable distance from Apache threats. The settlement began in an abandoned Spanish presidio, but under Poston's leadership it would become something extraordinary. The transformation of Tubac was remarkable. They cleaned the crumbling adobe fort, repaired buildings and corrals, replaced windows and doors, and built furniture from local lumber. They even established vegetable gardens to sustain the community. But it was the discovery of silver that would truly put Tubac on the map. The nearby silver deposits were yielding over $100 daily, and the discovery of the Heinzelman mine in Arivaca promised even greater riches. The settlement attracted skilled Mexican miners, and by Christmas of that same year, the population had swelled to over 1,000 residents. Poston's innovative spirit showed itself in the creation of a unique currency system. Paper money was made redeemable in silver, with each denomination featuring a different animal: a calf for 25 cents, a rooster for 50 cents, a horse for $1, and a lion for $10. Life in Tubac was far from the rough-and-tumble existence you might expect in a frontier mining town. Thanks to the presence of Mexican señoritas and a multicultural population speaking Spanish and various European languages, the settlement developed a surprisingly sophisticated culture. Evenings were filled with music and festivities, and good meals and conversation were the norm. But what made Tubac truly unique was Poston's role. He wasn't just the town's founder, he was its everything. He officiated weddings, granted divorces, had the power to execute criminals, and could even declare war. He was, in every sense, the king of his own small kingdom. However, paradise wouldn't last forever. The settlement faced mounting challenges: Apache conflicts under Cochise, triggered by unfortunate encounters between settlers and the military, a Mexican uprising, and the devastating impact of the Civil War, which recalled the garrison soldiers. The death of Poston's brother John at the Heinzelman mine was a personal tragedy that coincided with the community's decline. Women and children were evacuated to Tucson, and over $1 million in assets were abandoned to the desert. Farms that had been carefully cultivated returned to their natural state. But Poston wasn't finished with Arizona. He turned his attention to a greater goal, creating the Arizona Territory itself. The political process was fraught with challenges, including multiple failed congressional bills and complications from the slavery issue. The territory's distance from the New Mexican territorial government made administration difficult, but the Civil War actually worked in their favor. The Union desperately needed new sources of gold and silver. With General Heintzelman's influence with Lincoln and Poston's first-hand knowledge of the region, the pieces began falling into place. After a crucial meeting with President Lincoln and some persuasive testimony before Congress, success was finally achieved. On February 24, 1863, the Arizona Territory was officially created. Though initially overlooked for territorial positions, Poston was appointed Superintendent of Indian Affairs. He approached the role with characteristic creativity and compassion, traveling with gifts for tribes and bringing along a San Francisco friend to observe the living conditions of the Native Americans. His development plans were ambitious. He proposed a Colorado River reservation system and canal irrigation based on ancient Indian methods. In Congress, he presented over 10 territorial resolutions, and while his Indian programs met with limited success, he did secure some funding for farming equipment. Poston's quest for knowledge and innovation led him on an extraordinary international journey. Commissioned by the Secretary of State to study irrigation and immigration practices, he traveled across Asia, meeting with an impressive array of world leaders: the Emperor of China, the Mikado of Japan, the Viceroy of India, the Khedive of Egypt, the Sultan of Turkey, and the Shah of Persia. But it was his encounter with the Parsis in India and his subsequent interest in Zoroastrianism that would prove both enlightening and costly. His commission was withdrawn due to his increasing focus on religion. Returning to Arizona, Poston took up a position as Register of Land in Florence, working from a small adobe office for a modest salary. During his 4-year tenure, he became fascinated by a pyramid-shaped hill where he discovered ancient stone tower ruins. At his own expense, he built an access road to the site and hosted celebratory events, convinced of connections between this location and Persian culture. The final years of the father of Arizona were marked by decline. He worked as a customs officer at the Mexican border and at a Phoenix agricultural experiment station, living in near poverty and surviving on a $25 monthly pension from the legislature. When he died in June 1902 at age 75, his body was initially unclaimed, a sad commentary on how far the mighty had fallen. But the community, reminded of his contributions through a newspaper appeal, rallied to provide him a fitting memorial. 23 years after his death, a stone pyramid tomb was built on a hill in Florence, where his remains were finally laid to rest. It stands today as a testament to a man who was many things: an adventurer, a city builder, a territorial founder, and a dreamer who saw possibility in the harsh Arizona desert. Charles Poston's story reminds us that the American West wasn't just built by gunfighters and gold miners, but by visionaries who could see cities in the dust and civilization in the wilderness. His life reads like fiction, but every incredible turn was real, shaped by determination, innovation, and an unshakable belief in the potential of the Arizona Territory. This has been Southwest Desert. Join us next time as we uncover another remarkable tale from the American Southwest. Until then, remember, sometimes the most extraordinary stories are the ones that history almost forgot. The story opens on a hot August morning in 1854 along the Colorado River. A young German surveyor named Herman Ehrenberg wipes sweat from his brow as he peers through his transit, staking out a new settlement on the barren eastern bank across from the ferry landing of Dutch immigrant L.J.F. Yeager. Ehrenberg is accompanied by 4 other dusty and travel-worn men, including the ambitious Charles D. Poston, who has visions of colonizing this new southwest frontier. They have just spent 6 grueling months exploring unmapped parts of the Arizona Territory and northern Mexico. Now, at journey's end, they lack the $25 fare to cross the river on Yeager's ferry. Not one to accept defeat, Ehrenberg hits upon a clever scheme with Poston to trick the stubborn ferryman. He sets about conspicuously surveying a 936-acre town site, driving stakes into the sandy soil and sketching grand plans, while spreading rumors of a new rival steamboat landing and a city to be called Colorado City. When word reaches Yeager across the river, he can't bear the thought of competition cutting into his monopoly. He agrees to let the entire scruffy lot cross over in exchange for just 2 of the speculative town lots. And so, in a twist of frontier trickery, the foundations of what would become Yuma, Arizona, are laid. But who is this worldly German engineer and adventurer, Herman Ehrenberg? Our tale goes back to his birth in 1820 in Saxony, Germany. The restless young man runs away from home at just 15 years old, bound for New York. New Orleans is next, where news is crackling with word of conflicts out west. Ehrenberg joins up with the New Orleans Grays militia to fight for Texas independence from Mexico, gaining first combat experience at the December 1835 Battle of San Antonio. In March 1836, Ehrenberg is among 445 captured Texan soldiers imprisoned at Goliad. Just as they ready to celebrate imminent release, Santa Anna's troops receive orders for merciless execution. On Palm Sunday morning, Ehrenberg is forced out with his comrades toward likely doom. But as the firing squad volleys roar out, he throws himself to the ground, surviving along with just 26 other prisoners in what becomes known as the Goliad Massacre. Playing dead in the chaos, Ehrenberg crawls off to the San Antonio River with sword slashes scarring his face. Left for dead again by a pursuing Mexican officer, the scrappy teenager is later freed by General Jose Urrea. Ehrenberg rejoins the Texans in time for their decisive victory at San Jacinto, cementing Texas independence. He sails back to Germany to write one of the first books on the Texas War, helping spur German migration to the new Republic of Texas. Restless again by 1844, Ehrenberg travels overland to the wilds of the Oregon Territory, where he spends 2 years surveying and mapping. His adventures continue on islands across the South Pacific. Then, hearing rumors of gold, he sails to Alta California just as the Mexican-American War breaks out. He serves at La Paz and other hotspots along the Baja California Peninsula before discharge in Monterey, as gold fever sweeps Alta California in 1848. Ehrenberg joins the stampede to the Sierra foothills, spending years mining and surveying claims across Northern California. By 1854, lured by new uncharted frontier, Ehrenberg joins Poston to explore and map the newly acquired Gadsden Purchase lands along the Mexican border. Their information facilitates early American settlements in Arizona. Ehrenberg makes Tucson his home as Poston vigorously promotes their Sonora exploring and mining company. Despite Apache raids and Civil War strife that displace settlers, Ehrenberg and Poston kindle lasting interest in Arizona mining. By the mid-1860s, Ehrenberg is now a man of some means after years of elusive fortune, but it is not to last. In October 1866, while camping near the Dos Palmas stagecoach station, Ehrenberg is shot dead in the darkness for the $3,500 in gold dust he was carrying. The next year, prospectors establish a new mining camp upstream along the Colorado River across from Bradshaw Landing. It is first called Mineral City, then renamed Ehrenberg to honor the German adventurer who lost his life in the region. For a brief spell, Ehrenberg booms as the liveliest camp this side of San Francisco, according to an 1870 newspaper story. But it is another short-lived southwestern bonanza town. As mines play out and the railroad bypasses its shoreline, the fledgling port dwindles to a forlorn ghost town. Its crumbling mud and adobe walls melt back into the desert. The fickle Colorado River shifts course, abandoning the old landing site, leaving the antique settlement buried in silt and sand. Today, only a small cemetery remains. Weathered headstones and a historic monument remember deceased pioneers like Herman Ehrenberg and the once lively outpost that bore his name. Thank you for joining me on another Southwest Desert journey. Leave a like or comment. Hit the subscribe button for more romps through desert tales. Happy trails! Welcome to Southwest Desert, where we uncover the fascinating stories that shaped the American Southwest. Today, we're diving into what many called America's National Cactus Garden, the Gadsden Purchase of 1854. It's a tale of railroads, gold, and a $10 million gamble that would prove far more valuable than anyone imagined. Picture this. It's March 1853. And Franklin Pierce has just taken office as President of the United States. Standing before his advisors, he declares with conviction, "I want to uphold friendly relations with all the other governments on this continent. Especially, I want to settle the boundary dispute between Mexico and our territory of New Mexico." This declaration would set in motion one of the most significant land acquisitions in American history. The story begins with a series of diplomatic complications. The Mexican War of the 1840s had been, to put it mildly, a diplomatic mess. Unpopular with Americans from the start, it was really the result of a series of misunderstandings with Mexico. When the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo was signed in 1848, the negotiators were more focused on ending an unwanted war than thinking about future needs. In their haste, they overlooked something that would soon prove crucial, a route that Eastern Railroad interests desperately needed to reach Southern California. Enter James Gadsden, a Southern Railroad man whose appointment as special envoy to Mexico would change the course of American territorial expansion. When President Pierce unexpectedly selected him for this crucial mission, even Gadsden himself was taken aback. "But as a voluntary offer from the president, it is the higher appreciated," he remarked, before setting off to Mexico City with a detailed list of instructions. Let's take a moment to understand who James Gadsden was. After graduating from Yale in 1806, he had built an impressive and varied career. He'd been a merchant, served as an army man alongside Andrew Jackson in the Seminole Wars in Florida, managed a successful rice plantation, and finally ascended to the presidency of the South Carolina Railroad Company. He was the first to advocate for a wholly southern railroad route with Charleston as its eastern terminus, a vision that would significantly influence his diplomatic mission. The timing of this mission was crucial. The Southwest had been transformed by the 1848 California gold rush from a remote frontier into a vital corridor of American expansion. Settlers were pouring west by the thousands, and the need for a reliable transportation route was becoming impossible to ignore. A corps of engineers under Cook had surveyed the Rocky Mountains and identified the Gila River route as the optimal path to link the East with the newly opened West. There was just one significant problem. The best pass crossed through Mexican territory. This presented a delicate diplomatic challenge. Due to the instability of Mexican politics, American officials insisted that any railroad route needed to be wholly on American soil. The path Cook had identified followed old trails that Mexicans and Native Americans had used for generations, later adopted by wagon trains heading to California. Eastern business interests saw this not just as a way to serve the growing mining communities of California, but as a crucial link for trade with the Orient. The 1850s brought additional urgency to the mission. With growing tensions in Congress over the slavery question, Southerners were desperate to establish their own transcontinental railroad to rival the Union Pacific being built in the North. Gadsden, both a Southerner and railroad man, seemed the perfect choice to champion the settlement of the border question. When Gadsden arrived in Mexico City, his instructions were explicit and multifaceted. He was to emphasize that an eligible route for a railroad was the sole object of the American government's desire for a boundary change. He needed to stress how Mexico would benefit from the railroad, improve commercial relations, and was authorized to offer a moderate sum of money in the negotiations. The negotiations with Santa Anna, head of the Mexican government, proved successful. On December 30, 1853, Santa Anna signed a comprehensive treaty that included three major provisions. First, the United States would gain freedom of transit for mails, merchandise, and troops across the Isthmus of Tehuantepec. Second, they would readjust the boundary set by the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo to allow for the crucial railroad right of way south of the Gila River. Third, and most significantly, Mexico would sell 45,535 square miles to the United States, bounded by the Gila River on the north, the Rio Grande River on the east, and the Colorado River on the west. However, the journey from negotiation to ratification proved complex. When Gadsden returned to Washington with the treaty, he faced unexpected resistance. President Pierce himself initially rejected it. In the Senate, the debate split into three distinct camps. One group favored ratification of the treaty in its original form. Another pushed for an even larger acquisition of Mexican territory, including a port on the Gulf of California. And a third group, composed largely of Southerners, focused solely on securing a boundary line that would allow a good route for a Southern railroad. Northern politicians raised serious concerns. They worried this new territory might join the Confederacy, a fear that would later prove prophetic. They also dreaded the potential spread of slavery to the Pacific. These concerns led them to reduce the size of Gadsden's originally negotiated purchase to the area that was finally bought. The public reaction was scathing. Critics mockingly dubbed the purchase "our national cactus garden" and "rattlesnake heaven." The renowned frontiersman Kit Carson dismissively declared that a wolf could not make a living upon it. Thomas Hart Benton condemned it as desolate, desert, and God-forsaken. The Philadelphia Public Ledger cynically observed, "The treaty might as well be called a purchase of the right-of-way for a railroad to the Pacific as any other name." The newly acquired territory brought immediate challenges. Often called Apache country, many wild Apache tribesmen regarded this as part of their tribal hunting grounds. Border disputes persisted for years, keeping the territory in constant turmoil. Raids by Mexicans, Native Americans, bandits, and smugglers contributed to an atmosphere of tension and uncertainty. The political situation remained complex. After June 1854, when the new territory was opened for settlement, problems emerged immediately. The main issues centered around claims for damage by both nations in the boundary dispute and Native American depredations. A real hatred developed between the two countries, and Gadsden's subsequent appointment as ambassador to Mexico proved so unpopular that his removal was requested by outraged Mexicans who had opposed the purchase. Despite these initial challenges, development gradually took hold. One of the earliest pioneers to arrive after the purchase was Charles D. Poston, known as the "Father of Arizona." He established the Heinzelman ore mine, 30 miles from Tubac, and organized the Arizona Mining and Trading Company and a copper mine at Ajo in 1854. The discovery of gold along the Gila in 1858 further accelerated development. The territory's vast size presented administrative challenges. Tucson, the largest city in the Gadsden Purchase area, was 500 miles by stagecoach from the capital at Santa Fe. The Santa Cruz Valley, out of necessity, made and administered its own laws. In 1857, a bill was introduced in Congress to make the Gadsden Purchase a separate territory, though this petition was denied for several years. The Civil War brought significant changes to the region. Most settlers in the newly acquired area were Southerners, and in 1861 they voted to join the Confederacy. That same year, a company of Texas Confederates under Colonel John R. Baylor defeated Union forces in the Rio Grande Valley. In 1862, Jefferson Davis declared it part of the Confederacy. Interestingly, slavery wasn't a major issue in the territory. In 1861, only 22 Negro slaves were counted, though captured Native Americans and Mexicans had long served as slaves. The post-Civil War years brought rapid development. The first railroad track was laid in 1878, initially called the Atlantic and Pacific, later becoming the Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe. This brought a flood of prospectors and capitalists for the great mining boom of 1879. The Pecos Valley emerged as a thriving agricultural center in 1888, aided by the discovery of artesian water. The completion of a telegraph line from Fort Leavenworth to Santa Fe in 1869 marked an epoch-making event for the territory, and by 1868, daily mail from the east had dramatically improved communication. The numbers tell an impressive story of growth and development. From 61,547 people in 1850 for the whole of New Mexico Territory, the population exploded to 749,587 for Arizona and 681,187 for New Mexico by 1950. The region's mineral wealth proved staggering. From 1858 to 1940, Arizona alone produced $3 billion worth of metals, including copper, gold, silver, lead, zinc, and others. The agricultural success has been equally impressive. In New Mexico, with most of its land under irrigation, 1950 alone saw $78 million in crops and $127 million in livestock products. The Purchase gave us thriving cities like Tucson, Douglas, and Bisbee, and Cochise County now has an assessed value of well over $200 million. Today, the region maintains its unique character, a blend of the Old West charm with modern prosperity. Ranches, cowhands, rodeos, Native Americans, lost mines, and ghost towns continue to attract tourists and health seekers, while the area serves as a vital economic engine for the nation. Looking back, that $10 million price tag, which seemed astronomical in 1854, now represents what the region produces in value every single month. Perhaps the greatest irony. Many now believe we should have bought more when we had the chance. When Congress later changed their minds about acquiring land all the way to the Gulf of California, the Mexicans weren't willing to sell any more territory. The Gadsden Purchase stands as the last addition of territory adjacent to the continental United States, a fitting finale to America's continental expansion, and a testament to the sometimes hidden value in seemingly worthless land. This has been Southwest Desert. Join us next time as we uncover another fascinating chapter in America's Southwest past. Welcome to Southwest Desert. Today, we're diving deep into a fascinating but often overlooked chapter of the Civil War, the story of how Arizona Territory became a crucial chess piece in the conflict between North and South, While most Americans associate the Civil War with battles fought in places like Gettysburg and Antietam, few realize that the war's reach extended all the way to the sun-scorched deserts of the Southwest. Let's begin by understanding why Arizona held such importance in American expansion. Long before the first shots of the Civil War were fired, Arizona had established itself as a critical gateway to the Pacific coast. This wasn't just any territory. It was a vital corridor that had witnessed some of America's most significant westward movements. The legendary General Kearny had traversed these lands, as had John C. Fremont, the famous pathfinder, whose explorations would help shape America's understanding of its western territories. These early explorers were just the beginning. When gold fever struck in 1849, Arizona's routes became crucial pathways for the 49ers rushing to California's gold fields. The territory's strategic position made it essential for anyone hoping to control transportation and communication routes to the Pacific. As America expanded westward, Arizona's importance only grew, particularly concerning industrial developments like railroads and highways that would eventually connect the nation from coast to coast. The territory's relationship with California was especially complex, intertwined with issues of slavery expansion, border disputes, and the regulation of Colorado River water rights. These connections would prove crucial as the nation moved toward civil war, but to understand how events unfolded, we need to look at Arizona's pre-war status. In those pre-war years, Arizona wasn't even its own territory. It was simply part of the larger New Mexico territory. But don't let that administrative designation fool you. The region had already established vital Pony Express and U.S. mail routes to California, making it a crucial link in America's communication network. These routes weren't just mail paths. They were lifelines connecting the east and west coasts of a rapidly expanding nation. California's status provided an interesting contrast to Arizona's situation. Admitted to the Union in 1850, California had taken a clear stance against slavery in its constitution. Fort Yuma, positioned just across the Colorado River in California, stood as a symbol of federal authority and Union presence in the region. This fort would later prove crucial in Union efforts to maintain control of the Southwest. The slavery question cast a long shadow over Arizona territory. While California had resolved the issue through the Compromise of 1850, Arizona's status remained uncertain. This ambiguity would persist through the 1850s, making the territory a focal point for broader national tensions about slavery's expansion westward. When the Confederate States of America formed in 1861, their leadership quickly recognized Arizona's strategic value. The Confederacy's interest wasn't simply about expanding their territory. They had specific goals in mind. The region's mineral resources offered potential wealth, but more importantly, Arizona could provide something the Confederacy desperately needed: a Pacific outlet. Such access could dramatically alter the war's dynamics by opening international trade routes and potentially circumventing the Union blockade of southern ports. The Confederacy's first major move in Arizona came through General Henry H. Sibley, who received authorization to organize a brigade in Texas. However, it was Lieutenant Colonel John R. Baylor who made the first decisive action. On August 1, 1861, Baylor organized what he declared to be the Arizona Territory at Mesilla. This wasn't just a symbolic gesture. Baylor established a military government, named himself military governor, and set the territory's boundaries at the 34th parallel, later extending them to 36°30. It was a bold move that effectively claimed this strategic region for the Confederacy. The Confederate presence in Arizona reached its zenith when Captain Sherrod Hunter entered Tucson on February 28, 1862, commanding approximately 100 Confederate cavalry. Tucson at this time was a small but strategically important settlement. The population numbered only 500 people, with a majority being Mexican residents alongside some Americans and foreigners who were generally presumed to be Southern sympathizers. This Confederate occupation represented the farthest western advance of the Confederate States of America, a fact that would later take on significant historical importance. The Union response to this Confederate incursion came in the form of the California Column, a remarkable military force consisting of over 2,000 officers and men under the command of Colonel James H. Carleton. Originally, this force had been assembled to guard the overland mail route through Salt Lake City, but events in Arizona prompted a change in mission. Their new objective became clear: drive the Confederate forces from Arizona and secure the territory for the Union. The California Column's journey stands as one of the most remarkable military expeditions of the Civil War. Setting out from Los Angeles on April 13, 1862, these troops faced challenges that would have broken lesser men. Their route took them through Fort Yuma and across some of the most inhospitable terrain in North America. The soldiers battled scorching heat, treacherous mountain passages, and chronic water scarcity. They endured hunger, extreme fatigue, and the constant irritation of alkali dust that seemed to penetrate everything. Equipment maintenance became a nightmare in the harsh desert conditions, and the ever-present threat of hostile Indian attacks added another layer of danger to their mission. The most significant military engagement in Arizona during the Civil War occurred at Picacho Pass in April 1862. While this battle was small compared to the massive engagements in the East, it proved decisive for control of the territory. The taking of Tucson followed shortly after, with Colonel Joseph R. West authorized to capture the city. When Union forces entered Tucson on May 20, 1862, they found no resistance. The Confederate forces had already begun their strategic withdrawal. Colonel Carleton's arrival in Tucson on June 7, 1862, marked the beginning of a new phase in Arizona's Civil War story. He quickly established a federal territory of Arizona and implemented martial law. Carleton's administration was marked by strict but effective policies. Everyone was required to take a loyalty oath, and disloyal acts were met with severe punishment. Additionally, all residents had to prove they had lawful employment or means of support. While these measures might seem harsh by today's standards, they helped stabilize the territory during an extremely volatile period. The Confederate retreat from Arizona was part of a larger withdrawal of Southern forces from the Southwest. Sibley's forces abandoned their positions along the Rio Grande in May 1862, and Captain Hunter had evacuated Tucson on May 4th. However, the Confederacy wasn't quite ready to give up on Arizona entirely. In March 1863, General Magruder issued a directive aimed at reclaiming the territory, and Judge Hastings proposed an ambitious but ultimately unsuccessful plan to restore Confederate control. Even as late as 1864, Union authorities were concerned about reports of Confederate forces in Sonora and potential threats to southern Arizona. The final chapter of Arizona's Civil War story came through a series of administrative changes that would shape the territory's future. On February 24, 1863, the Arizona Territory was officially created as a separate entity from New Mexico, marking a new era in its development. John N. Goodwin was established as governor in Prescott, beginning civilian territorial government under Union control. By January 1865, the territory was placed under Department of Pacific jurisdiction, firmly securing its position within the Union's Western Defense Network. When the Civil War finally ended on April 9, 1865, Arizona had already begun its transition from a contested territory to an established part of the American West. The territory's Civil War experience, while different from the major campaigns in the East, had played a crucial role in determining the shape of the post-war nation. This often overlooked chapter of Civil War history reminds us that the conflict truly was a national one, reaching far beyond the famous battlefields of the East. The story of Arizona's role in the Civil War is a testament to the territory's strategic importance and the determination of both Union and Confederate forces to control this crucial gateway to the Pacific. While the battle for Arizona involved relatively few casualties compared to the massive engagements in the East, its outcome had significant implications for the shape of the American West and the nation as a whole. It's a story of ambitious plans, harsh realities, and the complex web of factors that influenced the Civil War's Western theater. This has been Southwest Desert. Thank you for joining us for this exploration of Arizona's Civil War story. Until next time, keep discovering the untold tales of America's Southwest past. Check out my large catalog of videos and playlists on the Southwest. Happy trails!